tea originated in China. And the Chinese have a very, very long history of tea manufacture and production. In fact, it dates back to 2737 BC, which is about 4,000 years ago. And in that time, the Chinese invented all methods of tea manufacture and processing which we still use today. Over time, tea evolved and other places started to grow and produce tea. So later, Japan, India, Korea started to produce tea. As a general rule, tea is more of a subtropical plant, so it likes warmer climates, although we can actually, in some cases, produce tea at cooler climates and at higher elevations, and those can have a beneficial effect on the antioxidant value and the flavor of tea, but it's a lot trickier to grow tea in cooler climates. And in fact, we're very proud to actually be the first company to successfully be able to grow tea commercially here in Canada. But it's still a work in progress. There's lots to do to develop the industry locally and be able to regularly produce tea grown locally. So the flavor of tea is impacted by the varietal that you use and where it's grown. So it's very similar to wine, like terroir. When we think about terroir, it's about the soil conditions and the climate. And then there's also another factor, which is the varietal of the tea bush. And that plays a very important role in terms of the flavor of the tea. So again, just like wine, when we have different grape varietals leading to very different tastes, we have the same thing in tea. So the main tea varietal is Camellia sinensis. And in fact, it's related to the ornamental camellia bush that we grow in North America, although for tea production, we use a different variety. So Camellia sinensis is the oldest varietal that we see tea being produced from, and it developed in China, and the varietal is actually got a very complex flavor, and there's many, many different regional ecotypes that have evolved in China, again, over 4,000 years. So what happens is that over time, plants adapt to the soil that they're in. And because China has such a long tea history and tradition of producing tea, there's many wild plants that have emerged and very, very unique ecotypes that we find that are as a result of the Camellia sinensis varietal. There's another varietal that's used for a lot of tea production, and in fact, it's the varietal that we see most often in teas we drink in North America or in Europe, and that's the Assamica varietal. The Assamica varietal comes from northern India in the province of Assam, which it's named after, and that varietal tends to produce a lot of yield, so a bush will produce more leaves and more tea than the sinensis varietal, but the flavor tends to be different. It's more bitter, and it tends to also have less complexity of flavor. And it's used a lot for black tea production, and we see it being used throughout production in India, for the most part, in Sri Lanka, in Africa, in South America, and so on. There's a third varietal, or a third main varietal that we see in tea, and that's an Indonesian varietal, and we see that grown in Southeast Asia, so in Vietnam and Cambodia and Burma. And that varietal, flavor-wise, is kind of in between the Chinese and the Indian varietal. So it actually tends to be a little bit more stringent, naturally a little bit more bitter than sinensis, but still milder than Assamica.